Hello, everyone. This is Mark Plaster, Senior Executive Editor for Emergency Physicians Monthly.
And this is Bill Sullivan. I'm one of the senior editors for EP Monthly. I've been working at a rural community hospital where it's just a single provider. We do between 12 and 24-hour shifts. I've been working there for about 9 years now. And I always try to be on staff at more than one facility. So one of the other places I work at is as a locum tenens at a trauma center. And I've been working there for a couple of years. And in fact, that's starting to wrap up now. Um, and then all my free time, I get to practice law. So I do contract reviews. I represent physicians in front of state medical boards. Help physicians out in malpractice cases. I can't really do the litigation part because it takes too much time, but I'll give them advice on pros and cons of their case and kind of watch over what the attorneys are doing. So I've got a lot of different sticks in the fire right now.
That sounds great. Today, we're going to be talking about practice lifestyles. As you know, or many of the readers know who have followed my writing in night shift, I've been a locum tenens, a full-time locum tenens for about 25 or almost 30 years, or I hate to say that, but almost 30 years. Traveled all over the country. The joke in our house is I put 5 million miles on my American Airlines card. And saw a lot of different places around the country. So we're going to talk today, Bill and I are going to talk a little bit about the different ways that emergency physicians are practicing medicine, emergency medicine. Judy Tintinelli, who is the editor-in-chief of our magazine as well as the seminal book on emergency medicine, was talking to us on an editorial call the other day and said that many of her residents now are doing locum tenens work, which is really a surprise to me.
Surprised
And
to me too.
yeah, it took me off guard. And so I thought, well, let's talk about the different things, different ways that you can practice emergency medicine now. And Bill, you start off with kind of telling about you're in a rural ER.
Absolutely. Love it.
What's the
So,
advantage?
so I mean, so you have to think there's when we talk about the different practice types, there's obviously the locum tenens, which is kind of a separate category that I think deserves some discussion. But then when you get into the different practice scenarios, you can have rural where you're kind of the only doc on staff and everything stops with you. Then you move up to suburban where it's so generally people consider it more cushy, but not necessarily so. Then you get into the urban inner city areas, and then you get to the academic or tertiary care referral center. So each practice setting has its pros and cons. So in the rural setting, I mean, so we work between 12 and 24-hour shifts, and some people say, "How do you stay awake for 24 hours?" And most of the time, you're not for 24 hours. There's occasional shifts where you really get hammered, but usually get several hours of sleep at night, so it's not so bad.
Yeah,
And
I did a shift or two, more than that actually, in a few places in Cadillac, Michigan, and years ago, and some places kind of out of the way like that, that, like you say, were 24-hour shifts or extended shifts. Let's put it that way. There was one place, I'm not going to say the name, that you worked all weekend. You came in on Friday and you would get off on Monday,
right.
and it was that slow. But the truth is, just like you say, you're the only doc in the house, and everything you do everything, and it did have a certain uh, interest to it. You could see some people who weren't very sick, and then you could see some people that were on death's door, and you were the only guy.
Right. And I mean, it's it may be off-putting to some people because you think, my gosh, what if something goes wrong? But after a while, you just get comfortable knowing what you can do and what you can't do. And hopefully you get comfortable with your referral sources where you can call up your referral source and say, hey, I got this issue. Can you take this patient? And then if they're sick enough, you get them out of there. But the flip side is at night, sometimes, they call you up to the floor because there's nobody else that's readily available. And I've gone to the floor several times to, take care of a crashing patient where normally maybe if you got a hospitalist or a doc that stays overnight in house, you don't have to do that. So the rural practices. I like it. I like it too because you get to know the patients. I mean, as scary as that sounds, you've got a lot of repeat
Yeah,
customers, and you actually get to know the patients. Where maybe
that's
not so
right.
much with the larger settings.
And in a truly remote setting, and people don't think of some areas as remote, but just one little vignette. I'm a sailor. Everybody, I think a lot of people know that. And I was in Nantucket a few years ago, and I ran into a cardiologist and in the grocery store, and I said, "Hey, what are you doing?" I asked him where he was from. He told me it wasn't Nantucket. And I said, "What are you doing up here?" He said, "Oh, I came up here to vacation. I thought I'd grab a few shifts in the emergency department." And and I thought, I don't think you know what you're doing. And I saw him about a week at the end of our vacation. It was about a week later, and I said, "How did you?" And I saw the helicopter coming and going and coming and going at Nantucket Cottage Hospital, and I said, "How did your shifts go?" And he said, "I will never do this again in my entire life. I've never been so scared in my whole life. I had two subdurals, I had chest tubes, I had all kinds of stuff." He said, "I've never done any of that stuff." And he said, "I don't know how you guys do this." And I said, "Well, you do have to be trained to do it. You just can't just assume you can walk in and take over in a one-man ER." So it was,
Right. And but I
I was
mean,
gloating. I was gloating.
when you're talking about how you do this, I mean, for the most part, I find that the practice setting is more relaxed than, at a suburban or urban type of a hospital. I mean, there's times where, there's a lull in the action. You can actually sit back and read a newspaper or check your emails and stuff, and you can't really do that as much as in the busier centers. So
Yeah, that's true.
something to be said for that as well.
Yeah, let's talk about obviously you and I have done that. Not everybody, not every emergency physician has, and I would really encourage the young docs if they haven't done that, at least as a locums, you need to experience a rural setting. It is enlightening. You're right. It is slower. You may be there a long time before you see anybody who's really an emergency. But when you do, you'll learn some things about yourself and about your knowledge base and how you practice. And so I would encourage young physicians to at least do a little bit of rural emergency medicine, if not a career. If it, if your family is, if you're a hunt and fish kind of guy and you like to be away from everybody, then rural emergency medicine may be the place for you, maybe the perfect place.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Especially if you do training in a like an academic or urban type department where you've got consultants, at your fingertips 24/7. Um, it's a different type of practice when you're a rural emergency physician, but it's also I think it's worthwhile. And it's
Yeah.
good to be I think it helps to be a well-rounded physician. You practice in both types of environments.
Yeah, and when these tertiary care guys end up talking to East Timbuktu, and they get a guy on the phone who really knows what he's talking about, they breathe a sigh of relief because suddenly they realize what they're getting, and they're getting something that they really do need to see. So,
Right.
I go back to it. I say that emergency physicians, young guys particularly, need to get out in the rural setting and kind of cut their teeth in some of those situations. But go on and tell me about your opinions and your experiences in community hospital settings.
So community hospitals, and I don't work in one now, but I've worked in several in the past, and those are a little bit faster paced. There seems to be more of a emphasis on patient satisfaction and an emphasis on moving patients through the department and what's taking this patient so long to get through, and
Right.
it just seems like there's a lot more emphasis on metrics, and that's not to say there isn't an emphasis on metrics in the rural emergency departments, but it just seems more of an emphasis in the larger facilities.
Yeah.
Um,
Some of that may be because you have an opportunity to make more money.
sure,
You're in a maybe a little bit more wealthy clientele, and they expect more. They expect it to be faster, to be friendly, yada yada yada. You know,
absolutely.
your press Ganey scores. You can be hung by them by one person who doesn't like the way you put on your tie. You know, so I mean, community hospitals can be tough.
And you're right. There is it difficult to paint with a broad brush, but I agree with you that it seems like the expectations of the patients are a little bit higher. Like I want to be seen within 30 minutes,
Right.
and all these these signs outside or on the highways that
Yeah.
say our waiting
Right.
time is currently 3 minutes. Don't do anything to help that. Um, but
That's right.
there's the expectations of the patients a lot of times will drive the medical care, and I'm not so sure that that's good medical practice, but
Yeah.
that's another talk.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, then, okay, there's another, obviously, a lot of emergency physicians coming out of training, all they want to do is turn around and get into another academic setting like the one they trained under. Sometimes they want to stay exactly where they were. Sometimes they want to go a notch up, and go to a big name training center. Have you ever had an opportunity to practice in any of one of those
I have. I worked at the University of Illinois in Chicago for,
Oh, wow.
boy, about 18 years, I think. In fact, I just
Oh,
stopped. I just stopped last year, and again, I only worked part time, but
yeah.
you
Yep.
still see a different practice environment, and there it's a little bit more deliberate. There it's we used to joke because like at the rural hospital, like the docs would get upset if you admitted a patient to the wrong doc, or if you called a consultant that a primary care doc didn't like, they would chew you out for it.
I lost a contract over that years ago in 1980, 85. We were admitting to doctors we thought were good doctors, and that got us fired.
Wow.
Yeah.
So the saying was, if you in a rural setting, if you admit to the wrong physician, you'll get chewed out for it. Whereas in the academic center, you have somebody comes in with pancreatitis, you say, okay, I'm going to call GI, and GI says, oh no, that's not a GI case, call liver, and then liver says, oh no, that's not a liver case, call the surgeon. Surgeon says, no, I'm not going to operate on that, call internal medicine, and you end up being 6 phone calls into it before you pull your hair out and just say, "You get down here now and you take care of this."
That's right.
So it
Or
can
you
be
deal with their
frustrating.
residents. You deal with their residents who are
Yeah,
taking great pride in not admitting to their
yeah,
service.
be in the wall.
That's right,
Um,
in the wall.
but there's some frustrating aspects, but it's
Yeah.
also nice because you've got all the consultants available, and yeah, maybe it's going to take them an hour or two to come down and actually see the patient, so your wait times are going to be longer.
Yeah.
But you have the consultants available 24/7. If you like to teach, it's a good thing too. You're working with residents. If you like to teach, they keep you on your toes about all the new developments, and you get to
Well,
learn at the same time and teach them.
yeah, and the obvious thing is that most of these academic centers are probably higher level acuity and particularly trauma.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
I worked at a level one trauma center in Philadelphia. The last year I was there, we had 530 homicides, and so
Wow.
yeah, and I can remember a shift where I was by myself and had 5 gunshot wounds. I had one time had 5 gunshot wounds simultaneously. And I had 2 trauma teams, and if they weren't serious, I literally walked in, saw that there wasn't a life-threatening gunshot, and said, "I'll be back to you in half an hour." And
Wow. Hey, I work at a trauma center. I've seen gunshots at the same time too.
yeah,
Just happens to be all in the same patient, but
that's right.
that's
That's right. Actually, when I volunteered for the Navy Marine Corps as an older, seasoned physician of the tender age of 49, when I told them that I had 25 years of trauma experience, a fair portion of it at level one trauma centers, they knew that I had a lot more experience than most of the Navy physicians in the field that they had, and so they were more than happy to take somebody with civilian experience. But that is definitely the fun, if you will, of academic centers.
yeah.
But
Hey,
the
one
downside,
other point I was just going to make, because that you raised, is that there is a higher level of acuity, and um, you really get to see a lot more pathology
yeah,
than you will in a rural center for the most part.
yeah,
Like when I was working at University of Illinois, they're world renowned for their eye care, and so some of the eye injuries and the eye problems that I saw at University of Illinois I'd never seen before,
yeah,
and now I'm pretty comfortable, like with anything, with any type of ocular problem, where Some docs may not be, but that's just because I've seen it before and I've
Right.
seen how the ophthalmologist manage it. So that's a good point to raise too, is that you really get exposed to a lot greater range of pathology and become more comfortable with it.
Yeah, you know, obvious in a high level trauma center like that, we cracked a lot of chests, and and we restarted a lot of hearts. I mean, we were able to do that because they came in quickly, and we had a big trauma team there. You could get right into them, and I'll never forget doing some locums a few years later. It wasn't all that many years later. It's just 2 or 3, and I was out in a setting out in West Texas, and I cracked the chest and got a heart started, called the thoracic surgeon and told him what I'd done. And he said, "Why'd you do that? Who do you think you are? What are you
That's my
doing?
job.
We don't do that out here." And so, yeah, you get skills that you wouldn't otherwise have. And I obviously, those of us who are adrenaline junkies, and I think that's 90% of us, at least we start that way.
Right.
That's part of the reason why we end up going to urban teaching hospitals. But after a while, when you need to make a little bit more money, or you've seen enough of that and you want to get into a better environment, then maybe you'll end up going to a community hospital, or if you need to be close to your parents, or you want to be in the woods or on on the shore, then you may go to a super rural. But uh, the other practice style that I want you to talk about, your experience, is the locum tenens practice style.
All right.
How'd you get
So
into it?
I got into it. It was kind of a fluke. Is that one of the things I always tell all the clients that I review contracts for is you've got to be on staff at more than one hospital always, because if you're on staff at only one place and you suddenly lose your job for whatever reason, it's going to take you months to find
I
another
know.
place to get on staff and to start earning income again. So
Right,
unless you got 6 or 8 months of disposable income saved up, you really
right.
got to be on staff at more than one place to protect your income flow. So
I
I
couldn't
was
agree with
work
that more. That's actually happened to me. I got canned one time, and I was scrambling to get another job because I had a wife that was pregnant, 9 months pregnant when we got canned. And
right.
oh, I know it was terrible, and nobody told me that hospitals did those sorts of things.
Well,
And
it hardly ever happens.
you're right. Yeah.
Excuse me. Uh, so,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
yeah, so my story was I had just I was working at the rural place that I've been at for many years, and then I was working in another facility that was also rural, but they were just it was kind of going downhill, and I was like, I got to get out of this because the uh, the practice patterns there were worrying me. So I gave my notice, and then just out of the blue, like 2 days later, somebody sent me this ad about would you like to make good money working at a trauma center? And I was like, well, I looked into it,
yeah.
and I started work, got along well with the director, who's a great guy, and started working there, and have been there ever since.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, I had a kind of a similar experience. I was in an academic setting, and I won't go into the details of why they went south, but it wasn't because of me. But the entire group basically was leaving simultaneously, and I had kids in grade school and junior high, beginning high school, and I did not want to start dragging them around the country, and there wasn't an immediate job opportunity for me. And so I tried something, and this was a long time ago. I just sent out a bunch of faxes back when we had faxes, and to several hospitals that were in the state, and said, I'm available. Anybody need any part-time help? I got a call in 30 minutes. 30 minutes.
Wow.
And they said, "Oh, is there any possibility you could work tomorrow?" And I said, "Well, if you can get the credentialing done, I told them how much I was asking and they didn't even flinch, and it was 50% higher than what I was currently making. And then when I agreed to come in the next morning at 7, about an hour later, they called me back and they said, "We're really kind of embarrassed, but can you come in tonight?" And and I realized they didn't have any coverage for tomorrow either. And that was the one time that I went in. I said, I'll be there, but I'm going to tell you something. If you don't call me by 5 o'clock in the morning and tell me who's coming in at 7, I'm calling the radio station and telling them that the ER is closed.
Oh,
And they flew a guy in from Michigan to cover the morning shift from that night. But what was interesting was I was kind of I realized at that point that, and since then we've done the studies, but 30% of the emergency departments at that time were understaffed. They were looking for somebody.
right.
And it may not still be quite that bad, but still they're looking for qualified people. And as a result of it, I found that I could send out a spray of availability emails or notices of some sort, and I always had work. And because I was willing to do nights, because I flew in, flew out, flew in on the day I worked and flew out the day after, I found that I pretty much could name my schedule and almost could name my rate. I mean,
Right.
I can tell you the number of times that I said this is what I charge, or they'd say this is what we pay, and I'd say no, this is what I charge, and generally it was about 50% higher. And I never, not one, zero, never did took less, and I never ever had somebody back off and say we don't need you, not once.
Wow. Wow. So, and that's kind of the point of locum tenens, is that it's kind of like the Wild West. The hospitals need the staffing,
Okay,
and they've got to get warm bodies, and they're going to do whatever they need to do to get the warm bodies.
right,
So,
yeah. If
but
you
the problem with locum tenens is that that the staffing needs like swing back and forth. Like sometimes they're gonna be overstaffed, and sometimes they're gonna be understaffed, and so you don't really have a guaranteed schedule.
no.
Um,
Well,
there's some
though I actually did. First off, I was willing to work in the worst possible locations. I mean, and this is no, I hate to say it, this is not a reflection on the places I worked. If you remember, I worked at your hospital. This is you're the exception. You were a great place. Everywhere else was a hole, But they were, and I think by location, remote locations or whatever, they were in staffing crisis. And maybe a doc died, he got fired. They just couldn't seem to recruit there. And so when a board certified physician with 10, 15, 20 years experience said, I'm available to work nights, they went, whoa, maybe we can get this guy to come out here. So they would pay the freight, and a lot of times and they paid airfares and hotels and meals and the whole 9 yards. And I didn't go through a locum service. I just dealt with them directly.
right.
And yeah, and made a nice living and got to know a lot of folks. And most of the places I went to, I went back and forth anywhere from 9 months to a year while they got their staffing situation stabilized.
But and that's the point, is that as you're working as a locum physician, you think, hey, this is great. What's going on behind the scenes is they're still looking desperately for other docs.
Yeah,
And so suppose you get a job and you're getting paid $500 an hour, and you
yeah,
think this is great. I'm going to be able to pay off my student loans in no time. While you're working that first shift, they are still looking for somebody, and they're going to say, hey, you know what? We're going to offer you $400 an hour. And when they get takers, guess what's going to happen? You're
right,
500. You're either going to say I'm going to take less, or you're going to be out of a job. Um,
right.
but and so that keeps churning back and forth until they get all their staffing filled, and then you're out. And the locums contracts that I've reviewed universally say, you know what, you may be scheduled 2 months in advance, but they say we can terminate this with
Right.
30 days notice. And sometimes they'll be able to say we can terminate it, even though you've been scheduled for those shifts and you've turned down other shifts in the future months because you're taking this locum spot. They can still all of a sudden yank that out from under you, and then you've got nothing.
Well,
So you
see,
got to be careful.
that's exactly, that's a good segue into you, Bill Sullivan, the attorney, and that is to make sure that you're not signing that kind of contract.
Or exactly, but and
If,
I'm not touting my services, but I'm
no, 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 I'm
just
not.
just
I,
going from what I've seen in the past and what
I,
I've seen happen to docs.
Yeah, no, I understand it. It's okay. You can actually plug your own services here. In fact, if those listening to this podcast are considering locums, then that is definitely one of the things you need to do. Is you need to have a primer in contract law. I mean, just a simple, you got to have this in the contract. And if they don't have it in the contract, you walk away. There's more fish in the sea.
There's plenty of locums companies out there.
Yeah, and and I personally would encourage people to go directly to either the group or to the hospital HR, whoever's doing the recruiting, and deal directly with them rather than that's my preference. I mean that no no that's
If
my experience
possible.
if
Yeah,
possible.
if possible. I mean, but the good part about locums groups too is that they've got more than one hospital. So if you say, I want to work somewhere in the, Dallas area, they may not just know one hospital. They may know several hospitals that they can get your foot in the door if you want to get into that area.
Right, right. And we can we'll in kind of the next phase of this conversation, we'll talk about the types of groups, okay? And and I did a lot of work for probably almost every contract management group out there. And and so I was dealing with these overworked recruiters who were desperately trying to fill the roster. Some executive had gone in and said, to the hospital, yes, we will take over your contract and we will put in qualified physicians, yada yada yada. And then they walk out with the signed contract, throw it on the recruiter's desk, and say, we need 12 physicians next month.
Yeah,
And and so these poor recruiters are out there literally begging people, and that's how they sometimes get some less than stellar performers. But if you're a qualified emergency physician and you're willing to go to some interesting locations, in quotes, you really have a lot of negotiating power, a lot more than you realize. And if you say no, I won't sign it with that clause in it, and just strike it out, and you're nice, and I would love to work for you. I really do want to work for you, and you mean it. But I'm not going to
yeah,
sign something that says I can be canceled at the last minute without a cancellation, fee or whatever.
right.
So anyway, those of you thinking of locums, talk to Bill. Okay, talk to Bill. Okay.
Well, those of you thinking locums also consider locums not as a as your job. Consider it more as a supplement to your income because
Right.
you got to have a regular gig that that supports you because the locums, it's by definition it's a temporary thing.
Right.
So make sure you've got some type of backup income
You know,
source
we're at,
available.
Yep, we're actually advertising a service in Emergency Physicians Monthly where we're just going to be doing like a big grid advertising, and we did this years and years ago, and it was a big hit. And I don't even know why we quit doing it, to be honest with you. But it lists any hospital that wants to be notified of people interested in part-time work. And even if you're completely staffed, I mean, I'm part of the University of Maryland group here in the Baltimore area, and we're completely staffed, great physicians, but we are also always looking for hole fillers. And so I'm encouraging hospital emergency departments it's a small fee, list your hospital and a contact point, a tiny bit of information about your hospital and a contact point, so that if somebody says, they're working in, Kansas City, or they're working in Florida, and they say, I've got family in the Baltimore area or Annapolis, or I've always wanted to be in the Chesapeake Bay area, but I'm not really ready to stop working where I'm working or cut off my base and run up there and see what's available. This is an ideal opportunity to come in and get credentialed, just like you say, in another hospital. And if they call you up and say, hey, can you work this particular holiday? We schedule 2 or 3 months in advance, and and if you can and you can make it a working holiday, you get an opportunity to kind of meet the staff, they meet you. If you find out whether you really like it, it's a working vacation. And who knows when the time comes and you let them know, I'm interested. I wouldn't mind coming up to Baltimore or Annapolis or one of the locations that we have up here. They already know you. They already know you, and
Right.
it's a
Great
very,
way to get your foot in the door.
it's a great way to get your foot in the door. And I mean, there's a gazillion things, reasons people do things like this. Your mother-in-law lives in Santa Fe, and you're not particularly interested in being in the house with your mother-in-law all day for 2 weeks, and so make it a working vacation. Let your wife see her mother, and you go off and do a few shifts, make some money, and who knows, you
You
might
could
end
go
up.
and move out and live with your mother-in-law full time.
That's exactly right. That's probably not a good example that I should have, maybe I should talk about surfing or hunting fish or something like that, but
Okay.
there's a lot of good reasons.
You could go hunting with your mother-in-law.
Go hunt. No,
Oh,
well,
this is going
yeah,
to go downhill quick.
this
Okay,
will
we
go
better
downhill
stop while we're
very,
ahead.
very fast. But no, it's just an opportunity for where you really started with is to actually have your line in several different ponds or several different lines out all the time, be cross-credentialed, either in your own town, your own region, or even in areas that you might have some interest in. And so it certainly makes it easy for everybody. Because I can tell you, I've been a director of an ED where I had some performers that I frankly, I really wish I could walk in and say, this isn't working out. You're a square peg in a round hole here. And yet, if I let them go, I'm cutting my nose off to spite my face, because I knew it would be a year to fill that hole. But if I had some part-timers that I really liked and I talked to them ahead of time and said, would you be interested in coming here if there was an availability? And then it becomes a lot easier. Then you don't have to have these abrupt, you're getting fired in 30 days and now I'm going to have to scramble and find somebody. It's a much easier transition for everybody. And you talk to any director and the director will be able to tell you, I've got this player and that player needs to move on. They're not really good. So anyway, I think that I think everybody, even if you're full time at one location, probably ought to have credentials in 2 or 3 or 4 other locations, and utilize that from time to time. So
I agree. I can't tell you how many docs that I've talked to that come to me in a panic and say, I don't know what to do. I just got fired. I don't have another job. I don't have any other source of income. It happens a lot more frequently than you realize. And even someone who's doing well at a facility, I've seen it happen with docs that are on staff 2 or 3 years, that there's a bad outcome or there's a complaint or they don't get along or they get in an argument with a nurse manager and all of a sudden they're gone.
yeah,
And then what do you do? So that maybe that's a segue into our next discussion in the
right,
future is what how to keep your job and what to do and what to look for when you're looking for a job.
right. Well, we've come to the end of our time to talk to and I hope all of you are listening to this podcast will join us again. We are going to be talking on a variety of topics. Bill and I will be anchoring this podcast, and others from the Emergency Physicians Monthly editorial board will be joining us from time to time, and other experts and individuals talking about issues that are relevant to emergency physicians, both personal and professional. Oftentimes those two overlap. So thank you for joining us, and join us again at EP Talk.